And that's where the little plus symbol comes from. So it's a G7 with a sharp 5, and then back to C minor with a different voicing. So it's still C minor 9, we're just taking the 9 from up here and putting it in the middle to make this little cluster, which is kind of a nice sounding chord. So to review our turnaround one more time, we've got 1 minor 7, which is obviously the root of the key of C minor, to 6-7 with a 9th and a 13, to 2 minor 7, flat 5. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the cycle of fifths. It's an important concept in jazz. It's probably something you've heard before. I'm going to explain it in some detail. You're going to know exactly what it is by the end of this video. And also, we're going to talk about the diatonic cycle of fifths, which is the most important concept in jazz as it pertains to something called the turnaround. You may have heard that expression before, but if you've ever thought, I'm ending on this chord in the tune, how do I get back to the top of the tune? And the answer is you use turnarounds, which are built from the cycle of fifths. So stick around to the end of the video. I'll be posting a link to the sheet music from today's tutorial. Think about the cycle of fifths like this. It's chords that resolve down a fifth. So for example, C to F, it's a perfect fifth. That's the start of the cycle of fifths. If you go from F down a perfect fifth, you get to B flat, and so on and so forth. You eventually arrive back at C. So take a look at the sheet music. We're going from C to F, down a perfect fifth to B flat, and keep going down perfect fifths, E flat, A flat, D flat, F sharp, B, E, A, D, G, C. All perfect fifths. Now, if you were to put chords over top of that, because the cycle of fifths is mostly useful as chords that resolve, you've got this: C to F, B flat, E flat, and so on. And eventually you arrive back at C. Now, this is not a very useful concept in jazz because it does go through a bunch of different keys. But to think of it in terms of cycle of fifths, it's really helpful because in jazz, things resolve by a fifth, not always a perfect fifth, and that's the difference. So I'm going to introduce to you what's called the diatonic cycle of fifths. That's chords that go down a fifth but stick to a specific key signature. In this case, we're talking about E flat or C minor. So the scale for C minor is this. Same scale for E flat. It's just starting on C. So if we go down in fifths from C, you've got C, F minor, B flat, E flat, A flat, D diminished, G minor, and C. So you're probably asking yourself, where do those chords come from? And they also come from the key, not just the cycle of fifths, which is diatonic, but the chords themselves come from the key. So you'll notice nothing is outside the key signature. There are no accidentals in the sheet music. So C minor, then F minor, and of course, you've got an A flat in the key signature, so that's where that chord comes from. And then B flat, E flat major, A flat major, D diminished because you've got an A flat, F and D in the key, and then G minor, and then C minor. Okay, now none of that sounds jazz yet. You get the idea though, it's all about resolving down a fifth. So let's introduce to you probably the most important concept in jazz, and that is what we call the turnaround. And the turnaround is how you get back to a specific chord. Like for example, if we end in C minor and the tune starts in C minor, you want to go from C minor to C minor. How do you get there? You use the cycle of fifths. And instead of going all the way back to the beginning, now you could use the entire cycle of fifths, but you've only got usually a couple of bars to get back to one. All right, just before we go any further, just wanted to mention that if you like videos like this, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Just push that little thumbs up button. That really helps the channel. And if you want to subscribe to our videos, it's a good idea to hit the little bell when you do, and you'll be notified of all the new upcoming videos that we have. And we're currently producing 1 or 2 videos a week. So what we're going to do in this case, we're going to start on 1 and we're going to go to 6 and then 2 and then 5 to 1. Okay, so normally this would be C minor, A flat, D diminished, G minor, because that's in the key, and then C minor. But what I'm going to do is introduce to you your first accidental, which is making this B natural into a G dominant chord, because G minor doesn't necessarily resolve well to C minor. So just change that one note and you've got a perfect cadence. Does that make sense? So 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. That's a turnaround. That's how all tunes turn around from the end of the tune and get back to the top. Now you can have turnarounds in the middle of a song when you're resolving to a specific key, but mostly it's thought about getting back to the beginning of the tune. But of course, it still doesn't sound like jazz. So where does jazz come from? Well, the answer is by adding extensions to those triads, you're going to get jazz chords. So extensions to triads, and we talked about this in other Jazz Mental beginner videos, where, for example, if we're in the key of C, you build up chords using the key signature. So C, E, G, and we're talking about tertian harmony, building in thirds, and then a seventh, and then a ninth, and then an 11th, which in this case isn't available because it creates a very harsh interval with the third of the chord. So it's never a good idea to do that with major chords, but we do have the 13th available. So you can see we've got a C major 9, 13 chord. So in the case of the example where we're talking about a turnaround in the key of C minor, we're going from 1 minor to 5, 7. Now we're changing this specific chord from an A flat major chord to like a dominant chord. We're going to resolve that to 1, which is 2 half diminished seventh in the key. And then you're going to resolve that to 5, 7, and then to 1 minor. Now we've added extensions in here, which is kind of cool because we want to make the chords sound more jazz. So each of these chords has extensions that comes out of the key signature, but you can also change those upper structure notes using accidentals. So we haven't done that in this case though. This is the most basic turnaround using notes that are not outside the scale. The only thing that we've done is we've changed the chord for A flat and we've made it an A flat 7 chord. And then in the case of G minor, we changed it into a G7 chord. And we're using upper structure notes in each of those cases. So for example, on the C minor, we've added a ninth way up here on the top. So we've changed it from a C minor chord to a minor 9. And all we're doing is using a shell voicing in the left hand, which is 1 and 7. And then we're going to A flat dominant 7th, which is a nice chord. The reason why that sounds great is because this chord is built in intervals of force. So it's got a nice, cool, hollow sound. So C minor to A flat 7 with a 13. You can see it's A flat has a ninth as well, which is this note on top and the 13th here. Okay? And then we're going to D half diminished 7th. And then to G7 with a sharp 5, and that's where the little plus symbol comes from. So it's a G7 with a sharp 5. And then back to C minor with a different voicing. So it's still C minor 9. We're just taking the 9th from up here and putting it in the middle to make this little cluster, which is kind of a nice sounding chord. So to review our turnaround one more time, we've got 1 minor 7th, which is obviously the root of the key of C minor, to 6, 7 with a 9th and a 13, to 2 minor 7, flat 5, or D half diminished 7th, to G7 with a sharp 5, which is 5, 7, and then 1 minor 7 or 1 minor 9th, which is C minor 9. Now the reason why I've shown you these voicings is because they're very close together. We don't hop around a lot, but there's a million other voicings you could use for these particular chords. Let's try a few. Or eventually you'll be able to do that because all you're doing is just changing a few notes around that come right out of the key signature and just changing the chord itself and sometimes some accidentals that are outside of the key signature. But you get used to that after a while. So different types of voicings. All I'm really doing is just cycling through this turnaround and using my experience from different chord sounds to make some type of turnaround progression. All right, let me post the sheet music from this exercise. All you have to do is go to this link here in the corner and you can go and download that. It's absolutely free to do so. And if you're looking for another tutorial to help you with your jazz piano skills, you might want to try this one.